Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tinkser. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. In this episode, I had the CEO and founder of On Purpose, Tom Rippin, as a guest. He runs an award-winning organization that believes in putting purpose before profit and helping people to find work that matters and they will care about. They do that by helping them building new mindsets and skills around leadership with a clear focus on doing good for people and the planet. We talked about the turmoil the world is in and what it means to an organization, the need for a new business and economic paradigm, the importance of doing the right thing in a crisis, and what kind of leadership is required going forward. This episode would help you to get ideas around how you as a leader should build and run your organization in the new future. Some great thinking in here. Enjoy. Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast, and today I have a very special guest with me, Tom Rippin from On Purpose. He is not from the hospitality industry, and that's, of course, as always when there's people come from the outside, is to provoke and think a bit differently about how we do things. So Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's very good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
So, Tom, you come from an organization I just mentioned called On Purpose. You're the CEO of On Purpose. Can you tell a bit about, who you are, the journey you're on, and the mission and passion behind On Purpose?
I am the CEO and founder of On Purpose. And at On Purpose, we develop leaders for an economy that works for all. As is maybe particularly obvious at this point in time, I think many of us are realizing that the economy that we currently have does not work well enough. It doesn't provide everything everyone needs to live a dignified life, and it also is not operating within the boundaries of our planet. And the way that we are trying to do something about that is that we are trying to develop leaders, talent to be able to do something about that from the inside of organizations.
How does it work? Do I go, if I was like thinking I want to do more purposeful work or more impactful work, and I wanted to go and have a job in maybe let's call them B Corps, that word many people knows, I would go to you guys first to get some, training, maybe to be retrained in thinking a bit differently than you normally would do in a hardcore profit-driven company.
Exactly. So the way it works is that we run a 1-year full-time leadership program. Typically what happens is that people who have, say on average, when they come to us, they usually have maybe 6, 7, 8 years work experience. They've had a successful career so far, but they've realized that there's something about their work, their job, that just doesn't work for them. It's not satisfying. And they've realized that they're missing that sense of purpose, maybe that sense of impact. And they're looking for a way to change their career. That's hopefully when they come across us and they apply to us. It's a relatively competitive process to get in. If you do get in, you quit your job and you come for us for 1 year full time. And during that year, we organize 4 things for you. The first is 2 6-month paid placements in a very wide range of organizations, but where you are always having some impact, be that social or environmental impact. And you're also always trying to bring into that commercial ways of thinking. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we do half a day week of training physically, although obviously not at the moment, but normally physically we get together on a Friday afternoon and have training across a very wide range of subjects. And the third and fourth elements are that you have one-to-one mentoring quite intensively and one-to-one coaching as well. And so at the end of this year, you will have gained some experience and lots of knowledge and skills, but importantly, actually, you will have done a lot of personal development and you will have developed a kind of very strong community, both with the people from your cohort, from the program that have been through with you, but also to the alumni and to all the other people around about On Purpose who make this program happen, the trainers, the mentors, the coaches. And that then obviously launches you into a purpose-driven career, for one, and also provides you with this, very valuable lifelong or certainly career-long community of people who are trying to help bring, really quite fundamental change about in how our economy works.
When people typically are done with that program, what kind of job are they going to go out and what type of companies are they typical joining after this program?
One of the beauties, I think, of the program is that we work with a very wide range of organizations, from big corporates through social enterprises, social investors, to charities, big and small. The philosophy behind that is really that we think that no one kind of sector or no one space has, in inverted commas, the solution to the questions we face, but actually what it's about is about finding the best approaches from all these different places and making sure that they get connected and kind of in inverted commas speak to each other. So people go on to all kinds of organizations. We have several alumni. We call our alumni fellows. We have several fellows working, for example, in Ben & Jerry's as social mission managers. That's like the kind of big corporate end. We also have, quite a few people in social investors like Big Society Capital and others. Many people in social enterprises across the kind of social enterprise space, but then also people in more what you might perceive initially as more traditional charities, be that grant makers or people who are having, grassroots impact. And I should probably also add, this happens in London, Paris, and Berlin, so we run this internationally. And so as well as having that kind of cross-sectoral interest and bringing people from different sectors together, we're also able to do that a little bit across borders, which is another kind of fascinating angle.
How many years, because it feels quite new all this, but how many years is it that you have been on the go now with your programs and developing them and of course scaling them across Europe?
We've just passed our 10-year anniversary, actually. So our first program launched in London in January 2010. In many ways, we feel like we've been talking about purpose and this concept and what it means to create a better economy for a long time. And in many ways, maybe a little bit longer than some of the debate has been quite as popular. But of course, it's fantastic that in the last few years especially, the topic around purpose and more generally, maybe systems change, to use a slightly more technical word. It's great that that's been coming to the fore so much. We like to think that we have something to add and to contribute to that debate from the track record that we have.
Taking it from there and going a bit into the context, what we wanted to talk about, because we had a bit of conversation before, we went on the podcast, because what is that we're going to talk about? And we talked about, an overhauling, you just mentioned system change. But if we just start with the current situation and what's going on right now, how do you see that, your purpose as a, organization, and what's going on now and what is all happening here in a way, if you see it from your guys' side? Because again, your message has never become more relevant, in my view.
I agree. Definitely. So the coronavirus situation is a very interesting one, and it's quite interesting to look at from a kind of systems perspective as well, in as far as that's possible to do from where we are in the middle of it at the moment. When we talk about systems change and bringing about an economy that works for all, we often talk about how do we create a healthy economy and how do we need to run our organizations in a healthy way to contribute to a healthy economy. In the context of the coronavirus, I think what is interesting is that it's exposed a lot of things that are actually not so healthy about how we have historically run our economy and about some of the, I guess what you might say, the kind of classic or the received approaches to how you're supposed to do things. Let me just give you one example. In a healthy system, and the economy and organizations are systems, so in a healthy systems, when we look at nature, one of the things we realize is that healthy systems always balance two quite important concepts, which are efficiency and resilience. The more efficient you want to be, the more you probably scale organizations, the more you limit the number of organizations you would have in an industry, etc. The more resilient you want an industry to be, as an example, the more small providers you would have that can double up with each other, that if one drops out, the others can take over, etc. In nature, in healthy systems, you have a balance. You don't just have big organizations, you don't just have small organizations. You have this kind of interesting mix between the two. Now, I would say that in our kind of more traditional economy, we have very much been focused on the efficiency side of things. And when you think about it, that's obvious in our historic mindset, because obviously efficiency drives down costs, driving down costs drives up profits, and ultimately that's what our historic system is trying to do. But I think the coronavirus has now exposed some of that efficiency thinking, and to bring that down very tangibly to, management practices, for example, just-in-time management, which is obviously a widely used methodology across supply chains and so on, maximizes efficiency. It means we don't have stockpiles, we don't have to have too much warehouse space. Everything arrives just in time, a very widely accepted and useful concept. But suddenly you have something like the coronavirus, and it exposes the fact that no one has any stockpiles, that everything arrives at the last minute, and any hitch in the supply chain, like factories in China being turned off, for example, suddenly creates big problems because we don't have that resilience built in. Sometimes we have to build in a little bit of resilience at the expense of some of the efficiency. And so that's just one maybe example to make it a little bit more tangible of why I think the current situation is quite interesting when you look at it through a systems lens.
You say that because in a way you are already now molding how potentially the future would look like. It's less bigger companies or players and then a lot of smaller, more locally business. Because one of the things, coming from the food world I've seen, and because I've observed that, it's how, let's take it from a supply chain point of view, butchers, vet shops, bakers have suddenly digitalized and actually, found a different ecosystem to serve people in their cities. And actually, they've actually challenged now that whole supply chain is challenging supermarkets. But actually, supermarkets are seeing drop in some different areas like veg and stuff like that because people go more locally. It's a trust thing as well. And that's a bit like, how things were before the whole world was industrialized, going back to the Second World War almost, that you bought from your local butcher, your local food producers and supported them, the local farmer for that sake. Is that what you're saying? It's going to happening in some kind of form and of course delivered in a new, more modern way?
I think so. I think that's one part of it. That's just one aspect of what I think healthy economies look like. And I'll come back to some other ones, but maybe just to flesh out your thinking with a very tangible example. So I have moved for a while to live with my mother, and she lives in quite a rural area. We're trying to isolate as best possible. And especially in the early first few weeks, it was very noticeable that, it's very difficult to get online deliveries from supermarkets, although there are two or three that deliver in this area. But precisely what you said, Michael, the local butcher, the local greengrocer, all set themselves up. They got together, they advertised on on the local town's website that they would deliver, etc. And so these organizations seemed almost kind of more flexible and able to kind of reorganize more quickly and provide services to people who really needed them at the time. So yes, I agree with you. So and I think this kind of balance between big and small and medium size is one aspect of what healthy systems look like. There are many more. I guess the overall principle, I would say, which gets me really excited, is that systems thinking as a discipline is relatively new. It really kind of emerged in the middle of the 20th century, but it's now advanced to a stage where systems thinkers across disciplines are able to identify, often in quite quantitative, almost mathematical ways, how healthy systems behave and what they look like. And for me, the interesting thing is, because as I mentioned, the economy is a system, organizations are systems. So actually, once you realize that our world is made up of systems, and especially these very complex things that we're trying to understand, like how the economy works, that's a system. Once you realize that, and then you realize that we actually have this knowledge from systems thinking around what healthy systems look like, I think it then suddenly becomes, to me, very obvious that we should be combining these two insights. We should be applying what we know healthy systems look like to one of the most important systems in all of our lives, which is the economy and the organizations we work for. And there are quite a few aspects of what healthy systems look like. One we've just mentioned about, with this kind of balance of different sizes of provision, organizations, if you like. Another, for example, is around the importance of circulation of resources, circulation of services and products. And healthy systems, for example, circulate resources to all parts of the system. They make sure that every last bit of the system has what it needs. They also make sure that resources get used over and over again, so they're kind of, it's as efficient as possible. Again, just to give you an example to make it very tangible, because I'm very aware that this can sometimes be a bit abstract, but one system that we all know very well is our human body. And if you think about your body, you have an immense number of cells in your body. We are largely, or we are partly, I should say, made up of cells. There are 37 trillion cells in our human bodies. And one of the things our body does, which when you think about it is actually extraordinary, is it makes sure that every single last cell has its own blood supply. So it has, a blood vessel bringing blood in, and it has a blood vessel taking blood out. And when you have 37 trillion cells, that is an incredible achievement of the body, and that happens all the time. And that's clearly around something that, an insight or a kind of a knowledge, if you like, that it's critical that everyone and every part of the system has what it needs to survive and to live and to thrive. If you then think about how well do we do in our economic systems or in our organizations on the same front, do we really distribute resources to everyone who needs them in our countries or in our cities? Well, probably not. Do we do that within our organizations even? We start thinking about pay differentials between CEOs and average workers and that kind of thing. Well, maybe not. We're not that great either. So this kind of way of thinking about healthy systems and what we can learn from them, I think starts potentially showing up not only some of the flaws maybe in our historic economic thinking and management thinking, but also in a very helpful and quite quantitative way, can start pointing us in the direction of this is the kind of thing you should be doing, this is the kind of thing we should be doing, rather than thinking about some of the historic frameworks that we've used.
What you're saying resonate very well, even though it could be quite abstract, because I read economy at university, and one of my friends works in economics, and he said that you should read a book that's called Donut Economics. And I got this book and I've started reading it, and there's a model in there, and it talks a lot about how do you create a safe space for humanity. And that's in principle what you're talking about again as well. How do we fairly distribute the basics or the resources everybody needs in a way that everybody wins, both, individuals and the planet. And then this model is quite complex. It's built on, food, water, education, income, health, and so on. And it tries to ask questions around the way, economies are led today. It's not working, these models, the invisible hand and so on. It's an unfair model. And it was quite interesting. Then yesterday I picked up that in Amsterdam, apparently, this is how they're going to approach the city's economy, a donut economy. And Amsterdam, in my world, is quite a progressive city. And it's going to be interesting to see what different. And this is due to the current situation. They really have put this forward because they've probably been thinking about it over some time. But now they think this is more important than ever to get the city back up and working as quick as possible. And that's a city that makes that decision. It's not even a state or a country. It's a city that decides that we need to build a different economy.
I agree. It's a really exciting announcement. And of course, one of the interesting things about it is that a city is a relatively definable system. You can draw a little bit of a boundary around a city. I mean, obviously that's not entirely possible, but you can envisage a bit of a boundary around the system and say, okay, within this city, we're going to try and make this different form of economics, this donut economics work. And the fact that they've announced this publicly and are going to give it a good go in Amsterdam, I think is really exciting.
Talking a bit more on these conceptual and complex things and taking that down, that what does this mean, because we all know that we are hitting, there's all over the news, the new now, and thereby in my world also a new business paradigm for how we, run businesses. What do you think that's going to happen, both short term and long term when it comes to doing business and the way we conduct business? If the economy needs to change, the way we do business, I guess, also have to change.
I think that's true. You can't change the economy without changing how we run organizations. And actually, I also believe you can't change the economy or organizations without us changing ourselves a little bit as well. Ultimately, what I think it comes down to is actually quite a fundamental level, changing the values by which our economy, also actually our society and we as our individuals behave. We have a set of kind of quite ingrained values which we assume is the way that the world works. And some of those values are well and tested and perfectly true. Some of them actually are not necessarily the only way the world could work, and some of them are not always that helpful. For example, we have a very strong value around competition and kind of winning, which then relates to kind of zero-sum games and all this kind of thing in economic theory. That's actually probably one that is not so helpful, and actually, again, if you look at how healthy systems behave, they actually tend to behave in quite a lot more of a mutual fashion. They behave in ways that the parts add up more, the sum of the parts add up to more than each individual thing together. And that's, again, one of the things that I actually think this current crisis, the corona crisis, is exposing or maybe highlighting in quite interesting ways. The fact that we are all connected, again, that is a very kind of systemic way of thinking about it, but we are all connected. I am affected by the fact that someone else who I don't even know, but maybe lives a little way away from me, has this virus. That affects me, and it's being made very clear at the moment that it affects me because I can't leave the house. Even though I think I'm not connected to them and I don't know them, actually we are all connected. That's one lesson. But it's also around this kind of mutuality point, I think, making clear, when we think about, for example, the clapping for the NHS, the helping our neighbors out, going and shopping for elderly people or vulnerable people, this kind of idea of needing to help each other out, of what goes around comes around and all these kind of things. Some of these, in some ways, are also quite traditional concepts, but I think they're being emphasized by the current crisis. And, my hope is, of course, that as we come out of this crisis, and there will be a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done, that we remember some of those lessons and we realize that it is actually possible to run organizations, to run business, and to run the economy in different ways. We have for the past 50 years or so had a I would say quite a one-track way of doing things in a kind of from an economic and management point of view. And I think we need to break that a little bit. That's maybe in the kind of short term, and how that's going to work and how well that's going to work, I don't know. I'm optimistic, but I'm also conscious that it could go either way. From a longer term point of view, though, I think actually the coronavirus is a big deal, but I would actually say that we were already before the virus in a big kind of phase of change. Thomas Kuhn, the kind of philosopher of science, talks about paradigm changes and how in science, in scientific development, the world kind of goes through, or the world of science goes through different ways of thinking about things. And suddenly, how we thought about the world suddenly becomes obsolete because someone has done some new experiments and they don't work with the old theories anymore. And then there's a period of confusion and a period of upheaval. And then after a while, we formulate a new theory of how things work, which incorporate these new results as well. And then we're in a new paradigm. And interestingly, the people in the new paradigm don't always or can't always understand the old paradigm because you think in such a different way. On a very big macro level, that is actually what is going on at the moment in our society and our economy as well. So from that point of view, even before the coronavirus, this is an incredibly exciting time to be alive and to be working and to have the opportunity to make a contribution and to be part of shaping, if you like, and contributing to and discovering and exploring this new paradigm.
When it all started the first weekend, I had a couple of books I hadn't read, and one of them was Simon Sinek's new book, and he talked a lot about this finite infinitive game. What game are you playing as a business? And I think you can take that down as individual and society level as well. That's what you're saying, is that things need to have a much more long-term now in business. The new paradigm is that it's not 3 year, then sell potentially many businesses. And it's been an illusion, there's a lot of illusionary money and borrowed money that's not going to be there again. It's going to be more about, you have to add value and impact. I think it also, one of the things I've been starting to pick up, and I don't know what your view is, that as individual, let's call us consumers or people that buy goods, we will definitely start asking questions, because I can hear people I normally would talk with now are much more critical about where the meat comes from and the veg, and they don't want to go in a big supermarket because they don't feel it's safe. So many things where they're asking questions why this happened. And some of them have found out now there is something called the meat industry in China. There could be the potential source to this, the wet markets. In my world, then the consumer starts to vote with their food dollars or their consumer dollars. And thereby, you will see a change happen from the bottom up. Companies will adapt to what people want to buy in the end.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point around Simon Sinek's book, one of the ways that I like to think about this is to again go back to the metaphor, if you like, or the analogy with our human bodies. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, if you think of your human body as representing an economy, just as a way of making this very complex economic system, let's try and make it a bit more tangible. And let's assume it was like a human body, and every cell in your body was an organization that is producing services and goods. Raw materials being transported around your blood, and money is being transported through your blood supply as well, and information is being conducted up and down your nerve cells, etc., etc. You get the idea. And like what you were saying is written in Simon Sinek's book, is if you think about how a cell in your body behaves, and the equivalent of that would be how an organization and an economy should behave, a cell in your body is essentially trying to do its best. It's playing its part in keeping your body healthy, producing whatever goods and services your body needs to maintain health and to maintain life. Now, if you think about what we expect our organizations to do, that's actually not what we expect them to do. We expect them to grow as fast as possible, to make as much profit as possible, and then to give that lot of profit to their shareholders. If you translate that back into the body analogy, cells that grow as fast as possible, that's what we call cancer. And if you think about it in that environment and you put that lens on it, it suddenly takes on a very different spin. And we suddenly kind of go, oh, hang on a sec, maybe that isn't such a healthy thing. So one of the things that I'm very interested in, and I hope, well, not just I hope, I believe has to be part of this new paradigm, is how can we get businesses and organizations in general to a point where they think about themselves much more as, how do I contribute to making the systems that I am part of healthier, and so that the collective system will survive. So in your example, Michael, in your industry, in the food industry, for example, what is it that I need to do to make the food system a healthier place, to make sure that even for generations to come, we will still have healthy crops that we can harvest, that we will have enough food, that we will be able to feed the whole population? What's my contribution to that? And that might sometimes mean actually that I don't maximize my growth. It might mean that I have to focus on something different. That's obviously a very big jump, maybe subtle, but very profound difference in how we need to think about organizations. But ultimately, I think that's much more the direction we need to head in.
We've seen, businesses acting differently in this crisis. Some are, more ruthless, and others are throwing themselves into almost altruistic journeys to both keep their business alive, but also try to, make an impact and make society and help out in society when it's difficult. Feeding people, supporting in any kind of way they can, give their technology away for free and say that could be repurposed to do something else. Why it's important to do the right thing in a crisis, because you talked a lot about that as well. It's important more to do the right thing than overthink what you need to do from a commercial point of view.
Well, I think there's actually two things happening. One is that the crisis is exposing people who maybe already weren't doing the right thing to an extent. So, for example, people who were doing a lot of share buybacks or something like that and spending a lot of their cash on that to enrich essentially their owners, rather than maybe investing in their long-term, who knows, R&D or whatever it might have been. I think it was Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum said that a lot of people have essentially been caught with their trunks down. So I think that's number one that the crisis has done, interestingly. I think number two is exactly what you say, Michael, is that people are reacting or behaving in different ways. And I mean, I would say always that, you need to think about what is the purpose of your organization. What are you here to do? What are you here to contribute? Or in the language that I just used, in what way do you make the system within which you operate healthier? I think if you focus on that and think about that, and then think about, okay, well, if that's what I'm trying to do, how do I build a business model around that? Or how do I make that happen? How can I resource myself to do that? Ultimately, I then have a belief that that is the way to do things and to go about things. I think if you, in this current situation, batten down the hatches, just do the commercial thing, try and preserve your bottom line, to be able to restart in future. I'm not saying that that won't work at all, and you may well survive. But I do think that increasingly people will kind of take note of that. That could be your customers, that could be your employees, that could be your investors or shareholders. And I think obviously this situation is catastrophic for many businesses, and many people don't have the luxury to think about what they're going to do. They may just be going out of business anyway. But for those of us who do have that luxury and can carry on or can maybe repurpose or whatever it might be, I think it is also an opportunity to behave in this more maybe mutual way, in this way that helps us all get through this situation. And ultimately, I can't prove this to you. This is maybe a belief of mine. Ultimately, I think that's going to come back, and that's going to help you in future. I think you've been a great example of changing what you're doing, thinking about how you can help out. And you were just mentioning to me, how that's created connections for you, the kinds of which you would probably never have come across if we weren't in such an extraordinary situation at the moment. That's a great example, if a relatively small one, of what, in inverted commas, doing the right thing can help do.
People notice what you do. People are looking out and observing what's happening. You can't hide a thing in the world we live in today as well, with all the transparencies there's around, social media and journalism that moves so fast. There has been some people that really have got their fingers hurt. And also companies, I wouldn't believe that would happen there. But yeah, you get surprised.
It plays into, I think, if you'll allow me one more kind of anecdote or example, the way that we think about purpose. And it's very influenced by a chap called Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps. He talks about purpose, about needing to have, this is at an individual level, of course, but I believe it translates to organizations as well, needing to have a purpose that is outside of yourself, that is bigger than yourself, that is beyond yourself. And he talks about this as being self-transcendence. And he puts that in opposition to what he calls self-actualization, which is essentially fulfilling yourself. Maybe in an organizational context, that means growing yourself, making yourself more profitable. And the thing that I think is really interesting is he says that, actually, if you try and focus on self-actualizing, you will fail. Actually, you can't self-actualize without self-transcending. The only way it works is that you have to self-transcend. So you have to have a purpose. You need to be serving something bigger than yourself. And by doing that, you might then actually self-actualize. That plays in, I think, to this kind of phrase of doing the right thing, because we also need to do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because we hope that it's somehow going to earn us some brownie points. Many people refer to this as kind of authentic or inauthentic leadership, but in some ways it's very simple. You have to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because you think it's going to, make you the connections or get you the deal or whatever it is. Because I think people very quickly realize if you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And ultimately, that is what purpose is about. You do purpose for purpose sake, not because it's going to lead you on to profit or something else.
No, and I 100% correct. And it's going to be interesting to see. I talked with somebody that's quite high in the charity sector, and his biggest concern was that all the help there is now, is that going to be there in 6 months' time, 12 months' time? Is this just a trend? He was a bit nervous about that. He's really appreciated there was so much help, but the help is also needed in 6 months' time. In many areas of society, he said, not only when it comes to food and stuff. There's going to be challenges with a broken economy that has to be, find a new way of working. But that comes very interesting to the next thing I would like to talk with you again with, Tom. You mentioned just leadership. Are you authentic or you're not authentic leader? So what kind of leadership is required now and going forward? Because if we talked about the economy is gone, the business paradigm is gone, it's important to do the right thing. That's a different mindset, than your biggest, Morgan Freeman's, your biggest job as the CEO is make sure that the investor or the shareholder gets the biggest return. That's a very different approach that's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, it is. It's a very different way of going about things and of thinking about things, a different way of being as well. And it comes back, I think, to the topic I mentioned around values and about how do we run organizations according to a different set of values. That's not an easy thing to do, partly because obviously you're going against a kind of prevailing culture that's difficult, partly because ultimately you can't always go against the culture. We need culture to change with us. And so to an extent, we all need to go through this transition of finding out what values do we want to do business with together. And we need to some degree, all change our values and how we do that. I think what we need for leadership at the moment are leaders who realize that you can do business and you can run organizations according to different values, and who are willing to, at the moment, go slightly against the flow and do business according to different values, and who will then inspire other people to do that as well. And we see that a lot already. We see that. I mean, what's so exciting about the current times, I think, is that, and I'm talking now not about Corona related, but at that wider level again, is there are so many organizations. You mentioned B Corp on the continent. We can talk about the Economy for the Common Good, it's called, or there is an alliance called the Wellbeing Alliance, or you mentioned donut economics. There are, and Amsterdam and what they're doing. There are all over the place these organizations, or like Amsterdam cities, where people are experimenting, doing things differently. They are doing business with different values. They're maybe experimenting with a different value. Maybe this business over here is doing value A and this one here is doing value B and whatever, but it's amazing. It's like the world is a great big kind of laboratory and there's thousands and thousands of experiments going on at the same time. And we're going to collectively learn that actually, which ones work and how they work and how we need to lead to make them work. And that's ultimately how I see this kind of bigger, wider change coming about, because the fact that we can do things differently will emerge from all these little kind of experiments that are going on. We need leaders who are open to that, who realize that, who will experiment with that, and who will inspire others to do the same as well.
I love books, and I've been reading quite a lot of books around principle bottom-up leadership, or leadership without management, so that you actually take the management layer out of organization and you actually give more power to the people actually solving the job in the front line in different industries, from caretakers to factories across the world, from companies in China, South America. Semco is a good example. Southwest Airline is another example of where, one of the challenges I see with leadership is there's been too many management layers. There's been too much politics and bureaucracy in many organizations. And now there is organizations out there going at the forefront, and is people advocating for that. People are quite, they are, in today's world, we are very intelligent and self-efficient people and can actually, manage a lot ourselves. We maybe don't need a manager. We maybe need a purpose and a direction that's clear and some clear game rules within that organization. And then we need maybe more a mentor, a coach to take us forward. I think we will see more people being their own boss in a way within these contexts as well. And that's definitely a different role for leaders, not just being a coach. It's actually being, a facilitator instead of having all the answers. And I think that's going to be even more clear in our very top down still, I would say, leadership culture in the Western world, if we want it or not.
And again, it's kind of interesting to then look at how does this happen in healthy systems, and how does this happen in nature. And one of the things that I found fascinating finding out a little bit more about this is that in healthy systems, it's not the fact that you don't have hierarchy. You actually still need a certain amount of hierarchy, because ultimately hierarchy needs to connect small teams or small players, or hierarchy is there to connect and create identity and to allow communication to flow between different bits. So you still need that hierarchy to an extent. But the important thing is that hierarchy is there to serve, if you like, the front line or the bottom of the pyramid. I think the issue often with our traditional management approach is not necessarily that there is a hierarchy, although I agree with you, I think often there are too many layers of it. But the issue is often that the hierarchy is set up to serve the top of the pyramid, to suck up the power, to suck up the decision making, to suck up the resources, when actually it should be the other way around. You still maybe need that hierarchy, but the hierarchy is there to enable the front line to make decisions as effectively and efficiently as possible, as close to the problem as possible, and so on and so forth. And then precisely, you get into your functions, like you say, well, maybe people who are working in a hierarchy like that, their role is maybe more around mentoring, coaching, collaborating, bringing people together, all those kind of things. So it does require a switch. But again, I find it fascinating that even for something like that, there are kind of quantifiable, very obvious parallels that we can see from how healthy systems work.
Yeah, and I guess it's all connected, down from individual, as you said earlier, up to an organization level. I agree. There's nothing wrong with structure and hierarchy as long as it's used as a framework to serve the front line. And this is also what Ken Blanchard, which he's been talking about for years, most of his career, about servant leadership. You're in service for your people and, the communities you're part of, and thereby also the planet as a leader. That's your biggest job in a way. And if you sort that out, you will have some very good results as a business as well. That's his philosopher. So how do you, running an organization over 3 countries that's all been very impacted by this situation, how is it for you as a leader, Tom? How do you keep yourself, sane, mental, sharp in all this? What is the things you are doing to be ready for every day? Things are changing fast, or has been changing fast, and maybe calming down a bit now.
To be honest, I think I probably don't do things very much differently from a lot of us, but I think there maybe are some things that I've been trying to do. I've been conscious of to take care of myself, and that sometimes just means very practically, what does this situation mean in terms of looking after my family and so on. And I think that's an important thing that people need to recognize. People who have children who are home from school or whatever it might be. Again, very practically, me and my wife had started doing a little bit of yoga every morning, which I'm getting more and more into. Whatever it is, I guess for me that principle is probably just a little bit of exercise. I've been realizing that news consumption is, some of it is good, but I can go over the top. So maybe I sometimes realize that I shouldn't always just have the radio or the television on or whatever, and I should think about how much that is. So that's number one. That's maybe at my personal level. But then also, within, I think, the organization, similar principles apply. We need to be kind to each other. We need to take care of each other. I was very aware that as we all started working from home, it's easy to still have interactions around tasks and deliverables and so on, but we were at risk of maybe losing the kind of more social interactions that we would have in an office otherwise. And so, we tried to think a little bit about how can we still have some of those social interactions, even if we have to do those virtually, and checking in with each other. My colleagues have also instituted a couple of just very practical things around more regular check-ins, but not necessarily by phone or video conference, actually just by kind of chat functionality, because it means not everyone literally has to be there at the same time, which can make things easier. So there's a bunch of practical things as well. And I guess then at the higher level, slightly more medium term, it's about, both trying to see what's coming down the line to an extent, and planning for that and being responsible about thinking through what could happen. But at the current moment in time, I think it's very difficult to try and see what the situation is going to be in 6 months' time. And there's only so much planning that it's useful to do at the moment for now. So let's think about how much can I usefully say, what can I do to prepare for different kinds of scenarios. But to an extent, We need to also be comfortable to let things maybe unfold a little bit more, and in systems language you would say for things to emerge, but doing so in a relatively active way so that you are out there, you can see what's happening, you can take advantages like you are, Michael. You've changed how you're running your business for the time being, but with a kind of an open mind and an open way of doing things, and that's actually, I think, leading you on to great opportunities which might help you in the medium term as well. It's that kind of balance between being prepared and being proactive without beating yourself up or without trying to plan in such detail for something that actually, frankly, we don't know because there's too much uncertainty still around.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on that by taking care of yourself first. It's a bit like the flight analogy where that the mask comes down. They always say, put on the mask on yourself first, and then the child next to you, or help the person next to you if they need it. And I totally agree. It's something I was trying to practice myself as well. Like, how do you actually keep your own energy and alertness? Because you need this such a complex environment to be in. You can't plan your way out of it. You actually almost have to evolve with it. And you can't do that without being a bit in discomfort. No matter how entrepreneurial or how used you are to ambiguity, you actually need to charge all the time. It's a bit like a battery. I say, okay, we need to switch up for today. We need to stop, at some point. I know some days there's more workloads than others, but it's about finding those moments of reconnecting with family and so on, because, it's not going to resolve over the next month or two. It's a long-term game. It's an infinite game, as Mr. Sinek says. Is there any last advice, like a top number one advice you would give any business leader out there you think they should start doing now, or think about, or reflect about as they have the opportunity right now?
I actually wrote a blog a couple of weeks ago to our On Purpose community. It's called A Moment of Purpose. And in that, I talk about 4 things, actually. If you'll let me have 4 rather than 1, Michael, but I'll be short. And they maybe sound, a little more on the emotive side, but let me take you through them. The first thing is, I think that as leaders at the moment, we need to care. We need to care, like we were just saying, for ourselves. We need to care for our families, our organizations. But we actually, I think this is also demonstrating to us this situation that we need to care even for those people who we don't know that we're connected to. Ultimately, unless everyone in our world is healthy, and quite literally so at the moment, we can't ourselves be confident that we are healthy as well. Second, I think we need to kind of keep hope, and we need to be positive and optimistic. I think as leaders we have a responsibility to do that. But the third thing is that I think we have to ground that hope in reality. We need to know what it's like going through this crisis, even if you are maybe from a very different part of society than one you live in yourself, or if you are in a very different organization, or an organization that's been hit in a very different way to you by this crisis. So understanding what other people's realities look like, and despite that still being able to develop hope, I think is critical. And then the fourth and the last thing is, which I think is critical for any leader and for any organization and for us as a society as a whole, is that we need to learn. We need to be constantly learning, and we need to, especially in times of crisis like this, we need to be able to take those learnings. What did happen? How did all this neighborliness happen? How can we maintain that? What happened for things to go wrong in the first place? Etc., etc. Not in a vindictive way, but we need to be able to take the learnings and then move on. So care, hope, realism, and learning. I'd say those were my 4 top tips at the moment.
Yeah, they're very good, and they're all connected. There's like an ecosystem between them. I can see that. So, Tom, thank you very much. It's going to be interesting to follow your predictions, or how the world's going to change, what's going to happen, both short and long term. But definitely, we're going to come out on the other side. And I'm sure there's some people that's got some great food for thoughts and reflection to go away with. Stay safe with your family, and lots of energy and power to get on the other side, Tom.
You too, Michael, and thanks again for having me on. All the best to your listeners as well.
Tom, thank you so much for your insights on how you think the world will look when it comes to business and economics, and also underline the importance of doing the right thing right now to create an organization that will thrive and survive in the new future. You can find more about Tom by connecting with him on LinkedIn, Tom Rippin. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please give us a like, share, rate, or subscribe to one of our channels. Thanks to Let's Talk Video Production for your support on these podcasts. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to our newsletter at hospitalitymavericks.com. Thanks for listening, and be Maverick.